What do you picture someone with anxiety to look like? How about someone with depression, with OCD, bipolar disorder, dissociative identity disorder? Maybe when you picture someone with depression, they always look sad to you. Or maybe you picture someone with anxiety as fidgeting 24/7 or hyperventilating for no reason. Maybe you see someone with DID as that one character from Split. Or maybe, just maybe, a person with any of these illnesses could look like your sibling, your best friends, or me. Hi, hello. My name is Erin Torres, the Senior Ambassador at Huntington Breast Cancer Action Coalition. I like roller skating, listening to music, and binging cartoons, and when I was 11, I couldn't eat spaghetti. Now, story time, let me explain. I was in Washington, D.C. for a week-long leadership program, and we had stopped at a beautiful Italian restaurant for dinner. A waiter presents us with one of the biggest pots of spaghetti I had ever seen. Now, I had eaten spaghetti countless times before, and I was starving from walking around the D.C. area all day, so this should have been the perfect time to dig in, right? However, just as I was about to grab a spoon, an all too familiar voice inside my head decided to converse with me. It was my brain, again, and today she was telling me,
Erin, if you eat the delectable saucy goodness, in 10 minutes, you will stop breathing, your throat will feel like you swallowed a porcupine, and you will never see the light of day again. You will be sent to the hospital, and your family will have to pay thousands of dollars in medical bills. Vacation ruined, and it's all because you ate the damned meal.
I'm sorry for the voice, I don't know why I did that, but my heart was pounding, my gut was paralyzed. Now, obviously, I didn't want to embarrass myself by passing away on the spot, so I dropped my spoon and sat there with an empty plate, accepting my fate. If anyone asked, I would say, oh, I'm just not hungry, it's not a big deal, right? Oh, but it was a big deal. To the girl sitting across the table from me, at least. Immediately, when she saw that I refused to eat, she came at me shouting, "How could you be so ungrateful? They provided you with this food, and you were refusing to eat? My mama works 3 jobs, so I learned to take everything I had, and you should too, you wench, you horrible human." Now, okay, look, I completely sympathize with this girl. I would never be ungrateful for opportunities given to me. However, I quite literally didn't have the guts to admit how I was feeling, that my refusal to eat in actuality stemmed from something that I couldn't control. I knew I would sound insane, but as a result of not wanting to seem crazy, I was met with the entire table canceling me because they believed I was ungrateful. It really was a lose-lose situation. Now, the spaghetti incident wasn't the first time I convinced myself I would get an allergic reaction to an all-familiar dish, nor would it be the last. It was simply another example of me not having the courage to speak up about the strange thoughts I was getting about the most mundane things. It was simply another symptom of generalized anxiety disorder, a condition that at the time I didn't even consider I had. Why? Because I had a mindset that me, of all people, couldn't get a mental illness. Mentally ill people ended up in institutions. They were dangerous to society, right? Even if they were not in an institution, shouldn't I have to be in a constant state of sadness or worry to have these sorts of conditions? I mean, I still get good grades, and I consider myself a very accomplished student. Wouldn't a person with a disorder be unable to do that? Also, wasn't I simply too young to get something as severe as an anxiety disorder? Well, moral of the story, I was very wrong about what it meant to have an anxiety disorder, or a mental illness in general. This belief resulted from heavy stigmatizing, something I'm sure you yourself have done before. Now, what is stigmatizing? Well, the American Psychological Association defines stigma as a negative social attitude attached to a characteristic of an individual that may be regarded as a mental, physical, or social deficiency, and could lead to the discrimination against and exclusion of the individual. Basically, stigmatizing is what leads you to believe that those with depression are sadder all the time, or those with schizophrenia are dangerous, and those with anxiety are always having panic attacks. it leads you to possibly avoid these people with a known mental illness as a result of these harmful stereotypes. Now, I'm sure like me, your beliefs may have resulted from media depictions and societal ignorance on what a mental illness looks like. For example, you may have watched movies such as Split or The Joker, which depict the protagonists/antagonists as being mentally ill and dangerous murderers. Or you see TV shows like Dr. Phil, which profits off mocking women who genuinely believe they're pregnant with Jesus, hoping you never end up believing the same things that they do. Or maybe you've seen celeb magazines or interviews in which the celebrity is being made fun of for going to rehab again or having a mental breakdown in public. This media reinforces false stereotypes on what a person with a mental health issue looks and acts like, causing people to fear approaching us. We call this media public stigma. This public stigma infuses the stereotype that having some sort of mental illness makes you weak, stupid, and vulnerable. It can cause you to deny your own mental health needs, making you afraid to speak up because you may not have symptoms that align with the stereotype of what you imagine such a condition to look like. Even worse, people could glorify these illnesses, such as anorexia, as a new fad, or obtaining an ideal aesthetic, which is equally dangerous because you are essentially promoting unhealthy habits that fuel an intoxicated and vulnerable mentality. It could cause family members to downgrade how you're feeling because it doesn't match up a depiction of what a depressed person or a person with an ED would appear to look like. Mental health stigma is further caused by American culture. Let's face it, America is stressed. A Gallup Emotions poll ranked the United States as the 7th most stressed country in the world, and rightfully so, as we live in a society that prioritizes work and climbing up the ladder of success as opposed to relaxation. We have little vacation days, a little maternity time for mothers, and an overabundance of students stressed from college applications, student debt, and other financial burdens, and just people living in poverty in general. As a result, we look down upon people who express their emotions and need to take a mental health day, dismissing their mental health concerns as we pursue economic success.
Or to make matters worse, places that claim to prioritize your mental health would say things like, okay, fine, take a mental health day, but it will cost you a sick day, and you still need to get all of your work done when you return.
Many people don't consider stress and mental health to be environmental health issues. However, when we are exposed to stressful situations, such as poverty, a work deadline, or getting caught in a traffic jam, our bodies produce a cascade of stress hormones which lead to physiological and psychological changes. We can start eating more, sleeping less, and engaging in habits that would harm us long term. Additionally, when we are stressed for prolonged periods of time, we increase our risks for developing heart disease, diabetes, cancer, and mental illnesses like anxiety, which is exactly what we were trying to avoid in the first place.
Stigma impacts all ages. Now, according to the National Alliance on Mental Illness, 1 in 6 U.S. youth aged 6 to 17 experience a mental health disorder each year, and half of all mental health conditions begin by age 14, most commonly ADHD, anxiety, and depression. Yet only half of these students receive the care they need. Stigma against youth mental health certainly plays a huge role, the way it played into my delayed diagnosis. Mental health stigma was the reason it took me 5 years after that spaghetti incident to finally receive a proper diagnosis for my condition, which, in its full name, is High Functioning Generalized Anxiety Disorder, or GAD. In my case, I didn't realize that I suffered from so much anxiety my entire life because it did not align with how I imagined anxiety to be. I imagined anxiety as having panic attacks all the time or being in a constant state of fear. However, in reality, anxiety manifests in several ways. I'm sure you can all relate to this, maybe not. Actually, for example, from 4 to 8, I actually had a form of anxiety called selective mutism, in which I would make the conscious decision not to talk to my peers, cousins, or teachers. Now, I was choosing not to speak because of a nagging, intrusive worry that I would sound like a donkey or something horrific. Even when I learned to overcome such a condition, I was still experiencing symptoms I didn't know were associated with anxiety. Now, you might be able to relate to this. Have you ever felt like everyone hates you? Or even simply rethought too many social interactions, just replayed them in your head. Or, you believe that you weren't good enough all the time, maybe worrying about being perfect in school. Now, I feel this often, and I still do. Additionally, on days I wasn't having an anxiety attack, I would feel weird sensations in my body that would pay ridiculous amounts of attention to. Like if my arm went limp after worrying about my arm going limp, or when it felt like I had an object stuck in my throat. It also caused me to avoid showering for a while, actually, because it was a common source of my worries for some weird reason. All these different symptoms I would have never associated with a generalized anxiety disorder in the past. But I started to connect the dots to my strange behaviors once I got that diagnosis, and I finally had a therapist to talk to. Now, to make matters worse, my parents had their own vision of what anxiety was supposed to look like. They would constantly say, "Oh, you're too young to be experiencing this. I doubt it's anxiety." Or they'd say something like, "Oh, but you're always happy. You can't have severe anxiety." Even when my teachers would call my parents regarding me having an episode in school, they would pinpoint it towards having a fear of tests. And my own mother, who, by the way, happens to suffer from anxiety herself, couldn't fathom me having this condition at such a young age because I was still accomplishing things and I wasn't sobbing all the time, and I was still part of the high honors program at school, so it didn't seem like anything could be wrong. Now, we may not realize it, but stigma impacts every aspect of society. In the workplace, more than 1 in 3 adults were concerned about retaliation or being fired if they sought mental health care. However, the cost of staying silent is actually more deadly. Dr. Don Mordecai asserts that the untreated depression cost $9,450 per employee per year in absenteeism and lost productivity. And mental illness is actually the greatest cause of worker disability worldwide. Now, even law enforcement is impacted by the stigma and discrimination. Police officers and firefighters are exposed to numerous traumatic events on a daily basis. And as a result, they develop illnesses such as anxiety, depression, and PTSD. In fact, a staggering statistic notes that twice as many police officers died by suicide versus dying in the line of duty in 2018, yet only 17% of them sought help. Unfortunately, stigma leads to a reluctance of officers and people in general just to seek help, which only leads to further increases in mental strain and suicide amongst police. Additionally, police officers aren't trained to deal with mental health issues of criminals, which leads to an increase in resorting to violence and unjust practices at the expense of the civilian. Now, I'm sure you guys have seen examples of such on the news, but I digress. Now, the biggest question is, how can we stop the stigma? How can we contribute to ending this mental health epidemic plaguing us? The answer is to change our environment, destigmatize and prioritize mental health. For starters, undoing the internalized stereotypes that we have towards us is the most important thing we could do as an individual, as it changes the attitudes of the way we address the mental health crisis. As individuals, we need to do our own research to address the stigma and come into first-hand contact with people who experience all of these mental health symptoms in order to learn and understand them. Since about 90% of teens and young adults experiencing symptoms of depression research mental health issues online and other people's health stories, it will be helpful to use videos and have more people come out about their stories if they're comfortable in order to have everyone around them feel comfortable and increase access to this direct contact. Now, luckily, us younger generations have already begun to take part in accurately portraying neurodivergence in movies, and celebrities are beginning to feel more comfortable with sharing their battles with mental illness online, and that's creating a culture that better accepts mental health. However, we still have a really, really long way to go, and we have other generations have to try and convince. Now, schools could benefit by mandating mental health services to children who may not have access to help at home. By training school facility to recognize the potential signs of mental illness in children, as well as creating a less competitive environment, they could prevent the development of future mental health disorders. At home, parents and peers would need to validate the experiences of a child with a mental illness as well. No more saying, you'll get over it, and you're overreacting, it's not that bad. Additionally, we can change the school environment to promote healthy levels of stress as opposed to unhealthy levels. Reducing homework, teaching students that getting a B on a test grade isn't the end of the world, starting school later at later times, like 9 o'clock, and making it mandatory for students to seek psychologists would be a great place to start. Businesses could provide dedicated mental health days as well as mental health services in order to create a safe space in the workplace. And at the federal level, the level with the most systemic change, we could reallocate the funding of mental health research to focus more on prevention, how to reduce the number of people suffering a mental illness, and identifying key stressors to prevent more people from developing these illnesses. Additionally, as a society, we need to de-stress, more mental health days, provide people, no matter the income or background, with access to therapy and other mental services, and something as simple as meditation or reporting more positive stories on the news so people can hear some good news for once. We need people to feel okay with letting out their emotions, no matter the gender or sex, and teach healthy communication to the masses. 2 years later, and I'm happy to say that my anxiety has improved significantly. Now, I also have hypochondria. That's still a work in progress, but we'll get there. However, this recovery was not without a fight, and I learned a lot of things about the way American society addresses mental health along the way. Though we have come a long way since the 50s, as a society, we need to continue to destigmatize and prioritize mental health in this country, understand why we are undergoing impossibly high rates of suicide and depression, and curb these agitators, increase access to therapy, take mental health into account on both an individual, local, and national level. By prioritizing mental health more in this country, we can reduce stress and help people live longer, happier lives. And maybe next time, a girl who finds herself afraid of spaghetti can seek help immediately too.